What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the latest edition of the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix. I'm your host, Ryan Coop, and I'm back talking about some more CFL Fantasy Football here this week. Changing up the format a little bit from the last 2 weeks, always trying to tweak things, figure out what flows best for me from a content production standpoint, what flows best for you from a content consumption standpoint. The last 2 weeks I did about an hour-long video covering everything from the week before and the week to come. I think I'm going to split that up a little bit this week. So this one will just be the recap of what happened in week 2 of CFL Fantasy, and then we'll have some more videos coming out talking about the best picks at each position, the value picks at each position as we go throughout the week. And that'll just help me be able to get it all out kind of, faster in a more relevant time frame than sitting down for an hour at a time to record an episode. So let's get into talking about week 2 of CFL Fantasy. It was a rough week for everyone, to say the least. A lot of big name players had a pretty bad week. Not many too high scoring players this week. In fact, only 5 players across the board putting up more than 20 points on this particular week. So not ideal. Many people were let down by the fantasy performances. And many, value picks actually surprised a lot of people in a very interesting week. So let's dive right into it. Let's take a look at how the quarterbacks performed in week number 2. At the top of the list, Saskatchewan quarterback Cody Fajardo. He's the most expensive quarterback in CFL Fantasy, and you can see why. He's putting up the points to start the season. A great first week against BC, or, well, at least the first half of that game. And he does it again here against Hamilton. A nice 25.5 points for Cody Fajardo. A surprise guy at number 2, Michael Riley, 20.28 points. Plays the entire game, throws for 340-something yards when he was listed as the backup for the week. A guy we did not expect to be in the lineup until it was announced 20 minutes before game started. The shenanigans at quarterback, or whatever you want to call them for BC, continue. It remains to be seen who will be the starter for week 3. Looks like Michael Riley's actually starting to practice this week and will be listed as the starter, but we'll monitor that we're going to have to monitor it right up until game time, because it seemed like he wasn't going to be ready to go. He was listed as the backup, and suddenly he starts and put up a fantastic fantasy performance with 20.28 points. We get the first look at Vernon Adams Jr. on the season. A sharp day for him, 19.3. Zach Collaros, another good week for him as well, with a couple more touchdown passes. And almost a 300-yard game for him. And then the points start to drop off a little bit. Trevor Harris gets the 14.2, aided by a garbage time touchdown pass to Shai Ross, but struggles. That offense just can't put points on the board out in Edmonton. He at least cleaned up the interceptions to give you a modest 14.2 points this week. And then things fall off the rails from there at quarterback. You expected a bounce-back week maybe from Jeremiah Mazzoli. I know I sure did. Well, you didn't get it. 7.5 points from him. Bo Levi Mitchell, 4 interceptions for the first time in his career. Seems to be struggling greatly so far this year. Also seems to be injured and may not be ready to go for week number 3. He puts up just 3.6 points, 0 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. An awful day for you and myself, because I picked Bo myself. If you took Bo in fantasy, that hurt this week. McLeod Bethel Thompson, many expected him at a cheap price point to put up a similar performance to what he did against Calgary in week 1. He puts up just 2.8 points, gets pulled and replaced by Nick Arbuckle, who does not come in and shine. Did a little better in the amount he played in than Bethel Thompson did, but just 1.8 points for Nick Arbuckle. Dane Evans comes in and replaces Mazzoli, doesn't get much done. And then we've got a couple carries there from Sean McGuire and Michael O'Connor, a couple of backups. So This week, the quarterbacks hurt you. I'm guessing a lot of people probably lean towards Bo Levi Mitchell, expecting him to, a good game against BC. We expected Bethel Thompson to have another good game this week as a value play. Trevor Harris, that offense in Edmonton just seems to have so many options available. You had to think he was going to bounce back. And same thing with Jeremiah Mazzoli, but a rough day for those guys. You really had to spend pretty much at a high price this week if you wanted to get a good quarterback. Moving on to the running backs, let's take a quick look at them here. The one running back who put up a big week this week was a guy I definitely did not expect to do so, and that's John White of the Toronto Argonauts, 20.9 points. A 110-yard rushing game and a touchdown against the Bombers. Again, this is a team that you don't run the ball against normally. They averaged 65 rushing yards against per game in 2019. And week 1 against Hamilton, it seemed like they would be doing the same. So, I caution stay away from John White, but Toronto couldn't get anything going in the passing game, and it was all White was all the production they got pretty much. A fantastic day for him, which he'll look to replicate as, we get the rematch between Winnipeg and Toronto coming up this week as well. After there, a big drop-off of about 7-8 points before the next best guy, which is William Powell at 12.7. A big week for Powell in the sense that they actually gave him the ball with the lead in the second half. 12 carries in the fourth quarter alone. A very solid day for Mr. Powell. William Stanback, his first game of the year, 11.2 points. Not a bad day from him. Did not get in the end zone, did not get too involved in the passing game, but did put up 11.2 points just on rushing yards alone. James Butler for BC, again, still in for the injured Shaq Cooper. Puts up 11 points. Not a bad day for him, especially at that $2,500 salary in CFL Fantasy. The running back duo in Calgary continues to split some points here. Kadeem Carey, 10.8. Ante Milanovic, leader, puts up 9. A combined 19.8 points. Not bad from Calgary's running backs, I'll say that. But not very helpful to you in CFL Fantasy when it's split between two guys like that. Sean Thomas Erlington for Hamilton picks up 10.1. He had a couple of catches there that helped pad those stats. James Wilder Jr., a bit of a disappointment, perhaps, after the week 1 he put up 8.5 points, 85 yards along the ground. But after week 1, where he got 7 or 8 catches for about 70 yards, I believe, bit of a disappointment. We didn't see him get more involved in Edmonton's passing game this week, and he falls back down to a modest 8.5. Chris Rainey got a couple plays on offense, some return yards as well, helped get him 7.8 points. And then looking at maybe one of the more disappointing efforts this week, Brady Oliveira, just 5.2 points. Not terrible given he was a cheaper running back salary, but we expect big things from the running backs in Winnipeg. They've been one of the top rushing teams in the league for 3-4 years now. Granted, Brady Oliveira at this point is no Andrew Harris, I would say, but a very promising week 1 for him. Expected a big week in week 2 against the Toronto team that I thought there was some room to run against, but kudos to the Argos defense. They gave him nothing. He was shut down at the line of scrimmage, play in and play out, and the Bombers had to rely on the passing game from there. So not a great week for running backs. If you put a running back in your flex spot, I don't think that paid off for you too well this week. It was hit and miss on a lot of them. Again, same thing we saw at quarterback. Just not a lot of points put up all around. The defenses really reigned supreme in week number 2. At wide receiver, there were some great value plays available to you. Some great middle-of-the-pack plays. In fact, most of the guys at the top of the list here were guys you could have saved some money on. If you're like me and you have a habit of trying to spend close to the cap limit that may have hurt you this week, because a lot of these receivers, as we take a look here at the top of the list, were guys in the 4,000, 500,000, maybe 6,000 price range, even a couple in the 2,000s and 3,000s. So 2 Bombers lead the way. Nick Dembski, Kenny Lawler, great days for them. They seem to be the lead receivers on the Bombers offense so far this year, especially with Darvin Adams out. And that passing game is looking good. It's looking good in Winnipeg. BJ Cunningham missed most of the 2019 season, but comes back, 19.6 points in his first game of 2021. Not a bad day as the Alouettes' leading receiver. A couple BC Lions, Lucky Whitehead, Brian Burnham continue to lead the way for the Lions. Another fantastic day for Lucky Whitehead, who is starting to make a name for himself as a go-to receiver in that BC offense. You better cover this guy down the field, because if you don't, he's going to blow right by you, and he's going to pick up premium yardage and maybe a touchdown like he did in week number 1. Kyron Moore puts up a touchdown for the second week in a row, en route to 16.1 points, becoming a real reliable fantasy option there out in Regina. And then we get into some of the depth picks here, both at $2,500. Actually, I believe Alford was as well, so the next 3. Rasheed Bailey picks up his first career touchdown for the Bombers, puts up 15.7 points. Daniel Braverman continues to be surprisingly heavily featured in that Toronto offense, 15.4 points, heavily used as a receiver. He adds in a couple receptions, I think 5 catches, 50 yards, something like that. Also gets some yardage in the return game. A great day for Braverman, who looks to be, like I said, making a name for himself in that Toronto offense that I didn't expect him to get many touches at all, with the likes of an Eric Rogers, Advaris Daniels, Ricky Collins Jr. ahead of him on that list. And then the return man himself, Mario Alford, season debut, 2019. He was a dynamic returner who we saw make plays over and over again. He does that here for Montreal, picks up a beautiful return touchdown, also had another big return as well. 14.2 points on the return game alone. This not even involved in the offense. This is what the return guys can do for you. They can make a big impact for your team, but they're high risk, high reward. It's not too often you see that return touchdown, and if you don't get that, take away 6 points off that board. He's at an 8.2. Not bad for a value pick, sure, but you got to be careful with taking the return guys if they're not going to be involved in offense. But when you do and it pays off, you're loving that kind of day in CFL Fantasy. Rounding out the middle of the pack here, Darrell Walker, Shai Ross, Mike Jones, a couple of receivers out in Edmonton putting up some nice points. Jake Weineke, Braden Lenius, Lamar Durant, and Mitchell Picton are the remaining guys who put up above 10 points for the week for week number 2. Braden Lenius again and Mitchell Picton, 2 more value plays at $2,500, both putting up over 10 points. So, like I said, you saved some money. If you saved some money and went for those value picks, you really couldn't have gone wrong on a lot of the top value picks this week. But boy, could you have gone wrong when it came to some of the higher priced guys that you expected to have a fantastic day. Kamar Jordan was probably my number 1 guy I was looking at coming into week number 2. BC's defense gave up a lot of yardage to Saskatchewan early in that game. I thought Jordan would be the go-to receiver for a bounce-back week from Bo Levi Mitchell. He was the go-to guy, but 9.8 points does not get into the end zone there. A bit of a disappointment there for him. Brandon Banks, 9.3 points. Disappointment at the $14,000 salary. If you're paying that much to try to fit Banks in your lineup and you're getting less than 10 points, that's just not going to cut it from a fantasy perspective. Likewise, Jalen Acklin, 8.1, with no DeVere Posey, no Braylon Addison, no Marcus Tucker, no Jalen Marshall. You have to expect, Banks and Acklin as the 1-2 punch in Hamilton, and wasn't able to replicate what he put up in week number 1. So a struggle for Hamilton's offense led to mild days for those two guys. Ricky Collins Jr. falls back down to 6.8 after a big 6-catch, 120-something yard game in week 1 for the Argos. He picks up just 1 catch, I believe, in week number 2, and did get in on the return game a little bit, but was not the Ricky Collins we expected to be featured as a go-to receiver for the Argos in week number 2. Jordan Williams-Lambert, 5.3. Josh Huff, 5.3. A couple more guys that I think there's just so many other options that the ball spreads around, especially in terms of Huff. I think it struggles with Calgary's offense. He has the talent, and Bo's been looking his way, but that's also, I believe, 3 of the 4 interceptions, I read the stat somewhere, that Bo threw in week number 2 were targeted towards Josh Huff. So they're looking his way, but the ball is not ending up in his hands. A struggle week for him, 5.3 points. Obviously, you're hoping for more from one of the go-to receivers in Calgary's offense. And finally, rounding out the list of wide receivers for week number 2, Quan Bray at 4 points. Mild start to the season for him. We didn't know necessarily who in Montreal was going to get the ball. They spread it around fairly evenly, and looks like a couple guys got more targets than Bray in week number 2. A very disappointing first 2 weeks for Armonte Edwards in Edmonton. This is a guy who was a 1,000-yard receiver in Toronto last season. Expected him to be part of that big 3 with Greg Ellingson, Darrell Walker, and the ball's barely gone his way, and he's barely done anything with it when it has gone his way. So 2.8 points, a disappointment if you're spending, above $7,000 on Armonte Edwards. Shaq Evans, 2.8 points, a quiet week for him. He did leave the game with injury, which certainly, prevents him from putting more points up, and may be out this coming week. So stay tuned for that as we get into the week 3 previews and the depth charts and all injury reports and all of that a bit later on in the week. A couple Toronto receivers also disappointing, perhaps. Tavares Daniels, 2.1. He's struggling to get off the ground so far this season. Jawan Breskison, again, also not getting much action his way from a passing game that struggled in Toronto, and what looks like a pretty bad injury for Jawan Breskison. Fell down, grabbing his knee. You have to think that did not look good, and he could be out a longer period of time, which, you hate to see. You hate to see that happen to anybody, especially a guy who, in the last season 2 years ago, already missed a chunk of time due to a nasty injury. So all the best to Jawan Breskison as he heals from that. And hopefully we see him back in that Toronto offense at some point this year and back to putting up touchdowns like he did in week 1 and like he did in the few games he played in 2019. And then rounding out kind of the disappointing efforts at wide receiver, Dominic Rhymes in BC. High-powered BC offense. None of it really goes his way. 1.9 points only through 2 weeks of the season. Definitely expected Rhymes to be making a bigger impact for BC, but looks like, Lucky Whitehead kind of came in and took on that role as the featured new addition wide receiver for the Lions. And then Greg Ellingson all the way at the bottom here. Just 1.1 points this week for Greg Ellingson. 5 targets, 1 catch, 1 yard. What a disastrous week. I cannot believe that Ellingson has struggled this much, that Edwards has struggled this much. Walker's had himself a decent start to the season, but Edmonton's offense as a whole, I'm staying away from these guys in CFL Fantasy at the price points they're at, I think, until we get them right back on track and see how they're doing, once they finally have a bounce back game. Because I thought it would come this week against Montreal, and it most certainly did not. And finally, to round out the results, let's start talking some defense. Defense is one of those positions I had a hard time picking this past week, so much that I didn't pick one because I struggled to fit their salaries in my lineup, and I just didn't see one defense standing out over another. I saw a lot of cases where they might have a strong defensive performance, but I could also see them getting shredded. So I was cautious. I didn't pick a defense myself. I know a lot of people employ that strategy regularly. Well, if the start to the season is any indication, you may want to start picking a defense because they are starting to put some points up on the board. The odds lines, the under has hit on most of the games this season with not very many high-scoring games. And the defenses are making names for themselves around the league as we check out their totals for week number 2. The Saskatchewan Roughriders, 18 points, 6 sacks, several turnovers against the Ticats. A fantastic day for the Riders defense, to say the least. They gave Hamilton no room to move offensively. If you're going to pay a premium for the Riders defense, they're the most expensive in the game. You want a big performance like that, and they put up 18 points, which very much helps make for a good fantasy week. BC puts up 15. One of the best value plays of the week, $3,200 for 15 points, 4 interceptions on Bo Levi Mitchell. They stopped that Calgary offense from really getting much going at all. Pretty good start to the year. Take away that first half against Saskatchewan. In the last 6 quarters, the Lions have played scary strong defense, and they're getting to the quarterback, and they're forcing errors on the quarterback, and they're making big plays. So kudos to the Lions defense on a big week. The Bombers put up a solid 11 points yet again this week. They've had 2 back-to-back weeks to start the year that have been very fine defensively, allowing less than 300 yards of offense per game and an average of 6.5 points, which is probably unsustainable, but very impressive in their own right. Add some sacks, add some turnovers to the list as well. The Bombers defense is becoming a reliable pick week in and week out. Montreal puts up 8 points on defense, shutting Trevor Harris and that Edmonton offense down. What an improvement this year. Their defensive line came up big. Armando Sewell, Nick Usher, Antonio Simmons. Big day for those 3 as they piled up some sacks to give you 8 points if you took Montreal's defense. Toronto's defense gets 7 points themselves as well. Did a great job of shutting down the run game. Struggled a bit against the pass game a little bit. But they did get to quarterback Zach Collaros a couple times, and they did force a turnover there as well. Calgary puts up just 5 points on defense. Hamilton's defense puts up 3. And a big goose egg from the Elks as, the big, scary defensive pressure by the Elks. One of the league leaders in sacks in 2019. They put up just 1 against Montreal and give up 30 points on the week. So that balances out for a 0 point. Not much help if you spent, $3,700, I believe, was roughly their salary on a defense that's putting you up no points. So disappointing week if you took some of those defenses from Edmonton, Hamilton, and Calgary. What did my lineup look like for week number 2? Well, like I said, not a great week for myself, not a great week for many people. I took Bo Levi Mitchell. That set me off on a bad foot to begin with. James Wilder, again, not getting those points through the passing game that I expected him to get. James Butler, not bad for $2,500 value play. Kamar Jordan, you expect more as the premium receiver you put in your lineup. Kenny Lawler seems to be a consistent point producer, 20.7 points for, I believe, his 2nd straight week, close to or over 20. Jalen Acklin taking a step back from week 1. And as I mentioned, I did not put a defense out. So 61.7 points in a disappointing week for myself. And hopefully, we can bounce back in week number 3. So that's going to be the goal. Going to need to switch up the strategies a little bit here, I think, to get back in the win column. I can tell you this, I'll definitely be picking a defense in week number 3. That does it for the Week 2 Fantasy Recap. Again, not a fantastic week. If you had a bad week of fantasy football, don't sweat it. You're not alone. Many of us, myself included, are with you on that one. And good news is Week 3 is about to be here in just a couple of days. And there are some great fantasy options available for week number 3, which I will be back with a new video probably tomorrow to start talking through some of the best options for week number 3. Make sure you check out for more CFL content, check out the Canadian Football Countdown, a podcast I do each week, talking through the top storylines from each game as from the week before. Check out also, follow me on Twitter at CooperTrooper42 to get fantasy talk as it comes out throughout the week. As the lineups, as depth charts come out, I tweet out anything of note from there to help you out in that regard. So make sure you follow me on Twitter there to get all the up-to-date info I don't cover in any of these videos. And as always, do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe, let me know what you like about the formats of these, which segments, which videos types you like, which ones you don't like. Help me produce content that's going to help people find success in CFL Fantasy. That does it for the Week 2 Fantasy Recap here on the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I will talk to you tomorrow as we preview Week number 3. Bye.